Good afternoon, everyone. You have a lot of great conversations going on. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're going to get started. I'm Anna Olsen. I'm Assistant Vice Provost of the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. Welcome to the second lunch plenary of the 36th Ann Ferren Conference. And I want to start by acknowledging a very special guest. Here today we have many special guests, but one very, very special guest who was instrumental in creating this conference all those years ago, and after whom the conference eventually was named. So please join me in welcoming Ann Ferren. And I actually want to express a very special welcome also to all the new faculty who are here today. Why don't you wave if you are one of them? And look around. So it's been amazing to see over the years how this conference brings our community together to connect with each other, to learn from each other, and to celebrate each other. And I hope you have had and continue to do that over the last 2 days and for the coming afternoon. And I also want to acknowledge one more time, I did yesterday, but again, all the work or the many cogwheels that are in motion to make the Ann Ferren Conference happen. So please join me in thanking the CTRL staff, the Chartwell's catering staff, the university events staff, the AV staff who have been working hard and still are here in the back to make sure that you can hear me. Thank you all for everything you've done to make this happen. And before I hand it over to our speakers, I want to make a very special announcement. I see curiosity everywhere, so here's a cue. You can see it on your tables as well, a green apple. What could that possibly mean? Well, earlier this week, we certified our 1,000th individual green teacher since the inception of the Green Teaching Program, which has rewarded AU faculty with green teaching certificates for their commitment to teaching sustainably since 2008. So I actually had to practice saying that a few times. It's not easy for a non-English speaker. 1,000th. It sounds pretty great, but it's actually, I was going to say it again, 1,000 green teachers. So, yes, please join me in celebrating and thanking all of them for the impact they've made over the years. I know many of you are out there. If we have any green teachers, grab an apple, wave. Awesome. If you're not a green teacher yet, it's not too late. We're on our way to 2,000 now. So, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Acting Provost Vicky Wilkins.
Thanks, Anna, and congratulations on that. Such an inventive program that we have. And again, I want to thank Ann. I've said it every time I've been at this conference and had a mic in front of me. It's truly amazing to see a university where right before classes start, everybody takes the time to come out and be together because we care about our teaching and our students and the experience they have here and how we move forward. So thank you for everyone showing up and making such a commitment. Now I'm going to bring up someone who doesn't need much introduction even at this point after being here several months, but we're going to welcome our President, John Alger, for a fireside. Try to get the Eurolog up here, but we'll go with a screen side chat. You guys probably know that John joined us in July, coming from JMU after being the president there for 12 years, a place where he really took on a strategic vision, grew issues around civic engagement, is a known national leader on those issues and topics, had a long career before that, both at Rutgers University and the University of Michigan, and has just come in and really started to put his stamp on how we think about going forward as a university and how we think about making sure our students are prepared for the world we live in and the things we do and what we need right now, both at our institution, in our community, and in our country, in the whole global environment. So I'm going to welcome him up. We have a whole conversation planned where you're going to get to know a lot about how he's thinking about his time here already and the future here at AU, and just a little more about him. So please help me welcome John Alger.
Great to see you all. This is a terrific turnout, and thank you, Ann, for being here. That really makes it very special that you are here, and what a great reminder of the legacy that you continue to develop here at AU. Thank you for your leadership.
Awesome. Great. Well, we're going to start with a question that I was really curious about. What has surprised you? You came to AU, now you've been here since July, so you've gotten to know the university and the community. What things have surprised you and inspired you about AU?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. And, there have been certainly a lot of things. One of the things that has really struck me, though, having been president at James Madison University for 12 years, where we used to have to really encourage a lot of students to come out of their shell at the beginning, to get involved and engaged. I came here and I'm meeting first-year students, and they're already telling me about their internships that they're involved in, around DC. I'm like, how on earth did that happen? You just got here. So that has really inspired me, the passion of the students, as well as, of course, the faculty and staff. The fact that they jump in very quickly with both feet, which, by the way, has challenges associated with it, as we've talked about, too, because as you're trying to build community on campus and everybody's off campus doing all these other great things, that can be a bit of a challenge. But the other thing that really has struck me since I've been here, and sometimes it takes coming from the outside, you see things other people might not because they've been living with it for so long, but AU's commitment to interdisciplinary types of approaches to what I call the grand challenges of the 21st century, issues like sustainability, economic inequality, different forms of social injustice, artificial intelligence. I mean, it's happening here, and people are working together across traditional academic boundaries. And of course, there's more of that we want to encourage.
Absolutely.
But it's exciting to see, and so many faculty that I've met are teaching in ways and doing research in ways that don't fit neatly into traditional academic buckets, and that's exciting to see.
Yeah, I think that's really true. When people talk about silos, I often think of the places they're coming from or have been here from before, because I think we've done a good job with that. There's still some that remain, and we can do more always, but I'm always really impressed to see. I have to say, I've been here 10 years, and when I came in, I was blown away. I came from the University of Georgia. Just the intensity around the student experience and how everybody was so engaged into that. That doesn't happen other places like it does here. And so that was something that surprised me coming in. I think you're right. The uncomfortable laugh we all do about the first year student who has an internship before a class even starts, right? We're all like, great, maybe. So I think that is a challenge we can work on and do that. I'm seeing Gihan right in front of me. I know the Career Center has such a huge play in that and what our students experience, so thank you for that, I'll say. So those are kind of the surprises and inspirations you have. But you've had this interesting career path, and I think there was a moment in which you could have slid over into being a lawyer and living in a legal world, and instead you kind of made this, swing into higher ed, into more of an actually political job, and as a president of James Madison and that type of thing. What kind of led you on that path away from strictly a legal type career into this higher ed environment?
Yeah, great question. It certainly was not linear and not planned. How many of you, when you were, say, in grade school or even high school, knew what you were going to be doing and are actually doing that? Anybody? A few people. Okay. Well, that's. I mean, I was that kid in school. I always loved school. I loved education, but for some reason, I had it in the back of my mind that I always thought I was going to be a lawyer. We had no lawyers in our family. It wasn't as if I had a role model nearby, but I was always fascinated by the law and public policy and how they structure a democratic society. And it seemed to me that lawyers were doing a lot of interesting things. So that's kind of what I always had in the back of my mind. And I went to college and majored in political science with a minor in history and a concentration in public policy at Swarthmore. But law school was always in my mind, and sure enough, I went straight to law school, because back in those days, many of us saw law school as sort of a natural extension of a liberal arts education. And I graduated from law school, had a ton of student debt to pay back. And back in those days at Harvard Law School, they said, oh, don't worry, you'll get a job at one of those big law firms, and they pay very well, and you'll be able to pay back your student loans. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I started my career actually right here in Washington, D.C. at Morgan Lewis, if anybody knows that firm, doing labor and employment law. But after a couple of years of late nights in the library, I had fallen asleep in the law library. I did not bill for that time, just so you know. But it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up and I saw this advertisement at the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights for lawyers. And I thought, gosh, who knew that you could be a lawyer at the Department of Education? So I went ahead and applied and ended up getting a job there. Took a big pay cut, by the way, at the time, which my wife reminds me this is before we got married and had a family and all of that. But I had been, very careful about saving and paying off the student loan, so I was able to do it. And once I got to the Department of Education, I was working with colleges and universities across the country on higher ed policy issues. And I realized very quickly, this is where I belong, is working with higher education. I had a real passion for it. I loved learning from these great colleagues, but I was still, very much a lawyer, but working with a lot of non-lawyers. I went from there to the American Association of University Professors for a few years and got to work with brilliant faculty, like in this room, but from all different disciplines. And then I ended up in-house, first at the University of Michigan, and then at Rutgers University as the chief counsel at Rutgers. And it was at Rutgers where the president said, I think you have the skill sets needed to be a president, and I will help you.
Oh, wow.
And having that kind of mentor and role model, someone who saw something that you might not see in yourself, was so valuable and important. I'm not sure that I would be here today without Dick McCormick, who was a history professor by background, but he encouraged me. He gave me assignments well beyond my general counsel role, and I got a chance to work with a lot of people, both in administration and on the academic side. I was able to teach as well at Michigan and Rutgers, and so, I ended up applying James Madison, and luckily they were willing to take a chance on someone who was non-traditional. And so here I am all those years later. But I can tell you, I've had a lot of phone calls since then from other lawyers in higher ed that have asked me, how do you do this? Can you help me?
That's interesting. But higher ed saved you from being a lawyer, so
Yes,
that's nice.
My friends call me a recovering lawyer now, yes.
I think that's a good story. I recently found when I was 7, I drew a picture of, I guess, a elementary school assignment and said I was going to be a teacher, but on there I also said I was going to live in Hawaii, which I spelled wrong, but still, like, I missed that part of it, right? I was like, I'm halfway there, and I like that very much.
This doesn't feel like Hawaii today to you, Vicky?
To me. No, I was like, wait, and I don't even know how I knew about Hawaii at that point, but I had big dreams, I guess. Well, so you end up at James Madison, and you're there for 12 years, and I didn't know that story. That's a great story. And you're there, you have this great experience, you build lots of great things there, but what are the things that now, having been here, you feel like those lessons from JMU really can translate into things at AU and things that are going to be helpful here and how you're going to think through issues?
Sure. So for those of you that may not be as familiar with James Madison University, it is a public university. That confuses a lot of people because, the name a lot of people think means that it's private, but it's a public university, 23,000 students, primarily undergraduates, but with some terrific graduate programs. So there, in many ways, are certainly a lot of similarities across higher ed, right? Public and private institutions do have a lot in common, but also there are some differences as well, and certainly some lessons learned after 12 years as president there. And one thing that I would say is when you're in the president's chair, you really have to have some sort of North Star that guides you, because you get a lot of advice. It turns out that everybody knows how to do your job. The students, the parents, the faculty, the staff, members of the community, members of the legislature, they all know how to do your job, and they're very willing to tell you how to do your job. So, being guided by the educational mission is really important, and sometimes you have to make hard decisions when you know you're not going to make everybody happy. And you want to, right? I mean, I'm one of those people. I want people to be happy. I want people to feel heard, to be a part of things. But there are moments when you have to make difficult choices, when you have to prioritize. And I learned from that experience it was really important for people to be heard as a leader, that people wanted that opportunity, but that if you explained your decisions, if you at least said, look, we've heard the different points of view, the different perspectives. Here's where we're coming out and why, that helps. It doesn't make everybody happy. It doesn't mean everybody will agree with you. But at least if people understand that you followed some sort of process and been thoughtful in making decisions. Another thing that I learned, and Vicki, you and I have talked about this, but it's really hard, even to this day, when someone is calling you all sorts of nasty names, you can tend to take it personally, right? You think, gosh, what have I done wrong? And you realize in these roles that comes with the territory. Now, our society, having said that, should do a better job, I think, and it needs to start on our own campuses about how we treat one another. But I can tell you, sitting in the president's office at JMU, I would have the nicest people that were so incredible and kind, and people that treated you incredibly well. And you also saw the absolute other end of the spectrum, people that thought, well, I can speak truth to power, and I didn't know you could use that many 4-letter words in an email until I started to serve in the president's office for a while. It was just amazing, some of the things that you would get. And so learning how not to take things personally is something that I still struggle with, but I've tried to learn, to have that thick skin. And the last thing I'll say is the importance of gratitude. This is an environment where at the end of the day, we all know what the challenges are, and we'll talk more about challenges facing higher ed. But look around this room, all these amazing people doing great work to inspire and teach the next generation of leaders for our society. What an incredible privilege that is. And so the importance of gratitude for all the people who make this possible, who are engaged in this noble endeavor. I took a lot of time to do handwritten thank you notes when I was president at JMU, but those are some of the things that I felt were really important. But I'd love to hear your take on that too, Vicki.
Well, I don't hear any complaints in the provost office. I don't know what you're doing up in the president's office. No, and I do think a lot is, really trying to meet people where they're at and be somebody that listens. You talked about explaining and respecting people. I was getting a job reference for someone, and the chancellor of another university said to me, this is a faculty member you need to give a reasoned no to. This is one, and I'm like, everybody deserves a reasoned no. If the answer is going to have to be no, I owe it to them, because I am grateful for what they're doing and because of how they move the institution forward, to give them a reason no. And so that's always been really something that's guided me to think through. If I can say to somebody, we're not going to agree on this, but I really wanted to hear each other out, and I might have to tell you no, but here's why that is. It cuts down on some of the 4-letter words, but no, it really does. I think it goes a long ways. And I will say I've been, there are moments in meetings on campus where it's Tom Merrill, Steve Sylvia, Jenny Axe, and there's a certain meeting on campus that can be notoriously rough, especially from the provost seat and the deputy provost seat. But I think we've got a lot done there together, and sometimes it has to be bumpy. And if we do have some level of respect for each other, and just know at the end of the day, if you don't like the answer, let's talk about it. And it may not change it, but I do think that ode conversation and that opportunity just to let people know what we're thinking is a really important thing here, and I hope we continue that. It kind of leads into what I'm thinking about next, which is kind of a macro, and then we'll go micro with a question about trust. And starting with the big question about higher ed and the fact that we sat, I think, in a really privileged position in higher ed for many years, even though maybe we didn't name it and recognize it, where people really trusted us. There was a trust for the research we did, for what we were teaching in the classroom, and I don't think we did anything to lose that trust. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that's a good conversation topic, but how do we start to think about the trust that we need to rebuild that people would have in higher education? Because we need people to trust us. We need people to understand the work we're doing, and what we're doing in the classroom is not indoctrination. It's not those things, and how important it is. But I'd be curious, from your vantage point and your expertise, how we start to do that and rebuild trust, the public trust in higher ed.
Yeah, this is such an important question for all of us, right? Because we're all feeling it. And yeah, I think it starts with a recognition that this is a bigger issue than just higher education. You all know from the various surveys that public trust in institutions of all kinds has been falling, and falling really pretty rapidly in the past decade in particular. When I was on a call, I guess it was just yesterday, with a group of presidents, and what we satisfied ourselves was, well, we're at least not Congress, right? They're always at the bottom of the list. Now, maybe that will change, who knows, but I guess that's supposed to make us feel better. But the reality is that declining public trust in institutions and in expertise generally is something that is a real dynamic that we're seeing. And of course, it reflects the increasing polarization in our society, the economic and educational divides in our society. I think social media has made matters a lot more difficult because people can put all sorts of myths and disinformation out there, and it goes viral very quickly. So there are a lot of reasons why this is happening. And obviously, we all know that there are real concerns about what is happening at colleges and universities. The conversation I mentioned yesterday, one of the important points that somebody made that I thought was really interesting is they said, you can't simplify this in a right versus left, because actually higher ed is being attacked from both sides of the political aisle. On the right, a lot of the attacks go to our values, right? This attack that it's all about liberal indoctrination in higher education, that we're too woke. I mean, you've all heard these types of critiques. But then on the left, there are a lot of criticisms about the value of higher education. Look at these increasing costs. Look at the debt that students have. Is it worth it? Is our society getting its bang for the buck, so to speak? So we're getting criticized from both sides of the aisle, and that's something that we need to be very aware of, that these conversations about the return on investment, not just for individuals but also for our society, are critiques that we need to take seriously. Now, having said that, I think there's a lot that we can do, and it starts with a certain level of humility, right? That we need to take seriously the concerns that people have. When I think about the American dream, which I took very seriously as a kid. I mean, I had great dreams about doing something different than what my parents and grandparents had done. Are we going to be an engine of social mobility, or are we going to reinforce economic differences in society and be elitist in that way? And those are real questions and concerns we have to face up to in higher education. So what are we doing to increase access and opportunity? And not just for 18-year-olds coming out of high school, but increasingly, as we know, an awful lot of higher ed is non-traditional students. It's adult learners who have to come in and out of American higher education. Are we nimble enough to adjust to that? So I think there are questions about, are we serving the students of the 21st century? And if not, what more should we be doing to think about that? And then we really do have to take a hard look, I think, at assessment of student learning outcomes, which is something at James Madison we did a lot of work on, to say not only do we talk about what students are learning, but we can prove it, and we assess it. So I think that's really helpful. And of course also the career outcomes, right? We care about that. I know we've got people in this room that do a lot of work with that, and we actually do have a very good story to tell here at AU. But I think those are some of the things we need to do a better job of talking about. But what do you think?
I agree. It's so well said. But I think also I always feel like we can't tip over into the only return on investment story. Absolutely. Like how we manage that between becoming a place that feels like the output we're looking for is only in job types driven outcomes, and that we lose sight of what else we do here that we all know is very important. So I'm always trying to figure out, my job very much has to be about, especially in grad space, how we how we position ourselves when we tell the story of the return on investment. But I think the entire university, all of you, everybody, we have to help in saying how that might not be just the job outcome data, and how we tell the story about how, things like, and we're going to talk about the Civic Life initiative, or other things that we do here are really about building people who, it might not show up in that job category, but that's okay, because it's important, and it's important to all of us in the work we do and what we need to be doing. So I think balancing that is, the trust can't only come because X number of students have jobs at the end of the day. It has to also come because we're a trusted source of information, and really trying to make sure that people understand why to college and how to be part of a community and society. So I think it's a balance. And I feel like day to day, depending on who I'm talking to, I can fall into either side, because grad enrollments, they want to hear, what's my job opportunity going to be? How much am I going to make? That's but it's about so much more than that. So I think that's really important for us.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Vicki, because so often when I would have conversations with legislators and certainly with parents and prospective students, the fixation is all about the jobs, right? And what are the workforce outcomes? And yet there is a public good aspect of higher education that we just don't talk about enough in this country, right? And that's the story that has been largely lost. I mean, we know there's actually a lot of good research on this point, what college does to reduce dependency on welfare, to increase the tax base, right? To improve health outcomes and marriage and family outcomes. There are so many societal benefits, and of course we're going to talk about what it means to have an engaged citizenry, which is really important. But that's a piece of the equation that we really have to get back to, and we need help. I think that's where not just us telling that story, but having some allies and partners, which could include our board members, it could include corporate partners, and hopefully some folks in government that understand how critical it is to have a healthy higher ed sector.
No, I think so. I do think just talking about that, how important that is, and something that we should all be rallying together to do and get that story out. And it's so funny you said legislatures. How nice is it we don't have legislatures? Having been at another public institution, that is an interesting thing. Thinking about trust, though, on a more micro level, and I know this is something that we've talked about since your arrival, and that is how on this campus we think about and build trust, and how important, maybe even more important than the public trusting us, is that we trust each other and recognize some in this together type part of what we have to do in the coming years to get this all in place and keep us moving forward. So how do we think about that and building trust internally with one another, and showing that? It's a big deal to me when I came into this role. I was very nervous because I felt like I had done that in the school I was in. We had a good thing going, and then I was like, ooh, all these new people, and how are they going to feel? And really trying to make sure people can feel like they trust each other and administrators as it be.
Yeah, no, that's a great and important question, and I have to say it takes work and it takes time, right, as we both know. So I have to say that's one of the hardest things about having made a presidential transition. I feel like there's a lot about the job that I was familiar with, right? But I had 12 years of relationships with faculty and staff and students that knew who I was and knew what I cared about, and I'd like to think that we built up a lot of mutual trust and respect over that time. So then you come to a new institution and you feel like you're starting all over again in that way, and I understand that, and that's human nature. So how do we deal with that? I think a couple things. I mean, first of all, there's no substitute for actually spending time together, sitting down and talking about issues and just getting to know one another. And by the way, it doesn't always have to be in a very serious formal meeting, right? You'll notice we've done things like have the unity meals, the week of kindness. Those are very deliberate in terms of trying to build community and have people spend time together. Sit down and break bread together. I love the fact that there's a meal today as we're having this conversation, because it's a lot harder to sort of vilify somebody when you've actually sat down across the table from them and broken bread together, right? But I think honest and open communications matter, and that's something we all try to try to work on. And that, by the way, is a two-way street. Sometimes people think that trust is all about, well, I'm going to sit back and you've got to prove to me that you're trustworthy. But it actually needs to work both ways, right? If you're going to have trusting relationships. And I guess one thing I would ask of everybody, and that I certainly try to do, is to assume the best rather than the worst of people. Again, if you look around this room, most of the people, I would dare say, probably everybody here is here because they have a passion for the mission of higher ed. That doesn't mean that we're all going to agree on everything. We don't all have the same perspectives. I hope not, right? Because this is a university and we want multiple viewpoints and perspectives. But if we could start from that baseline of thinking, you know, the people that are here are good people. They care about this mission. They care about educating our students. That would go a long, long way. And so trying to model that, I think, in leadership is important. But I would welcome, Vicki, if you've got the answer of how we can do this quickly.
I don't have the answer. My answer is I think people know this, I will show up and have a conversation with anyone that asks. Like, I agree with you, John. You're so right about it's about being together and talking, and, you know, it's great when it can be in person. It works even online, I've found, but just being able to go to people and say, I will sit and hear you. I think you talk a lot about active listening and humility, and I think that's what it takes. But also realizing we have to trust them too. Like, a lot of people say, you know, well, I don't know if I can trust you. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure I can trust you either. And they seem a little surprised by that answer. And I'm like, well, that is how it has to be, right? I do need to feel like we can get things done together because we're that. So I think we both feel very strongly about wanting to have trust and taking the time. And it's work, right? I mean, those relationships in our life where we do have trust, we all know we've worked on those for years. And so doing it in an institution and organization setting, I think is tougher in many ways, but worth the work, and I think something that's worthwhile for our institution. So talking about things that you have really got started and kicked off since you've been here in just a few months. And one, of course, has been the Civic Life. And I know from talking with people at JMU and looking at what you did there, just the tremendous work that was done and what a legacy you leave there in the work that they're doing. I also know, because I'm involved in many of the conversations, the many ways in which national organizations all over the country look to you as a leader on this, and now are bringing that to AU and saying, well, you're at AU, and we know AU's mission, and we know AU sits in this place, and this is going to be really important to them. And I think, I know even, you know, before your arrival, we had started doing some really great things here, but now having your leadership is important. So can you kind of talk about your feelings about the Civic Life, why that's so important to you, and why you think that, you know, it was great at JMU, did great things there, but how it can even maybe be bigger at a place like AU?
Well, and frankly, that's one of the reasons I came to American University, because this is a real passion of mine, and I felt like of any institution in the country, given its mission and history, location, that American University had a really special opportunity, and frankly also an obligation, to play a national leadership role on this front. So it was very much one of the things that was in my mind when I decided to come here. And I would say, you know, it starts from a couple things. One is, you know, that recovering lawyer in me always really cared about this idea of democracy. You know, I was this nerd that loved constitutional law, as my daughter likes to remind me. And, you know, thinking about what it means to have we the people in order to form a more perfect union. What does that mean in practice for us generation after generation? And the way I think of it is you have this wonderful aspiration, right, of equality and liberty and justice, and then you have the reality on the ground, which is not quite there in so many respects. And then it's the job of each generation to decrease the gap between the real and the ideal, right? And we're now in a period where we know we cannot take democracy for granted. 10 years ago, when we were starting this work up at James Madison University, and we had a Center for Civic Engagement and a major emphasis on this, I would talk to people on the board, I would talk to people in Richmond, and they'd sort of give me this look like, well, that's nice. Now tell us what you're doing about workforce development, right? How many computer scientists are you graduating and how many engineers? And of course, that was important, and we could talk about that too. But I said, look, this gets to this public aspect of our mission to have those engaged leaders for the future of our society. Yes, they need to get good jobs, but they also need to be those civic leaders and leading nonprofit organizations and people that care about the important public policy issues of our time. So 10 years ago, it was really hard to get the attention, and I can say on both sides of the political aisle, that was true. Now, when I go to national meetings in higher education, and even now increasingly talking to public figures and others, they get it. They've watched what's happened in our country in recent years, what's happened around the world, and they say, yeah, we'd better start paying attention to this. This is actually really important. And in K-12, I'd be curious how many of you felt like you had a really good education in sort of civics in K-12 education? So more hands than I expected to see. I'm glad to see that. As you all know, in recent years there have been a lot of cuts in that area, and certainly a lot of students come to us with very little background in just the basics, right, of how government works, how decisions get made, and certainly in things like the importance of civil discourse and how you engage in that. They just don't have those skill sets, and I'll tell you what, COVID really made it worse. Students spent a lot of time sitting behind keyboards, not interacting with other people, not developing those social relationships, and that was really destructive in a way that we're still living with, I think, in terms of just how do you get along with people, how do you work together with people on diverse teams. So the Civic Life Initiative, I think, is really going to help us build some vital skill sets in our students and in all of us, too. It's something that, it's not just for students, it's for faculty and staff and alumni and our entire community. But it's something that I really believe the time has come for a serious conversation. The problems that we face are too big for any one of us to solve alone. So we have got to work together. We've got to figure out how to work across our differences to solve problems. And so I think Tom was back there. There he is. I see him. And others of you that are helping us with the Civic Life Initiative, I hope everybody will be involved with it. But this is an opportunity to differentiate and distinguish American University even more. There's been great work already. Yeah. That's one of the exciting things. We have great faculty here on this front, but there's much more we could do. Absolutely.
I think telling the story of what we're doing and how people are working across so many disciplines. I just met with someone today, I don't know if Katie's here, Katie Borum, about the work she does on civic engagement and humor and entertainment. And then Dana Fisher and Cece does great work on the environment and civic engagement. I mean, there's just so many ways in which it draws great work in our chemistry and biology departments. It's really exciting to see, and pulling that together as a university story. I know you had partway through, maybe close to the end, but you've done an intensive listening tour on this campus. And many of you in your different units have had that opportunity to sit with John and to talk with him about the advancement of the university. And I know you're starting to think about this, and we'll be talking about strategic plan coming up and all of those things. But how do you think about the things that are going to differentiate AU? Because that's, I think we all are looking, not because we want to do new things, but we want people to understand the things we're doing here. Absolutely. And just how they do differentiate us from other places. But how are we going to do that? What do you see as the ways in which we can start to tell the story of our differentiation and bring that attention to AU?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because one of the things that you learn when you're doing strategic planning, and again, this was part of the conversation I was having just earlier this week with other presidents, is the temptation for all of us is to write a strategic plan that tries to be all things to all people, right? And then you start to read these things and they all sound exactly the same, and you have no idea what institution you're talking about. And so I think, for starters, we do need to think about, this is a crowded higher ed marketplace. There's a lot of competition. What is it that distinguishes American University? Of course, we're going to be trying to do great teaching and have great research. And lots of universities are doing those things. We want to have community engagement. Lots of universities are doing that. But what can we do that's really distinctive? And of course, some of it stems from our history, our mission, and our location, being here in Washington, D.C., with some special opportunities, certainly, to engage in public service, to lead in public thought leadership about how you actually solve problems. The Civic Life initiative, certainly, I think if we do it right and do it well, can be really distinguishing for us, especially if it cuts across all disciplines. Not just the usual suspects, right, like political science and history, but to have the scientists involved, to have the humanists and the artists involved. I think that can really help to distinguish us. One quick point I might make about that too, Vicki, I think there's a temptation when we think about something like civic engagement to sort of put that off to the side and say, well, that's like this separate thing for higher ed to do that's different than the typical teaching and learning that we do. But if you actually look at the skill sets that are needed today out of our graduates, there's some work that the American Association of Colleges and Universities has done, AAC&U. How many of you are familiar with AAC&U? Probably a lot of you, right? The national conference is coming up. But they have done work over the last decade or so with employers about what skill sets they want to see in our graduates. And when you look at that list, it's things like critical thinking, oral and written communication skills, problem solving, teamwork, leadership, ethical reasoning, resilience. Turns out that these are the same skills that you need for civic engagement, right? That they're mutually reinforcing across all majors. So that's what the employers are actually telling us. They want to see those skills being developed. And that's where it's really exciting for American University. If we can do this Civic Life initiative the right way and make sure that it's incorporated across the entire university, our graduates are then going to have the skill sets that employers want to see, as well as our society needs.
Yeah, I think that understanding those skills and, like you said, reinforcing them across different ways in which, and the civic thing may come from an assignment you do in a course that we wouldn't normally put into a civics bucket, or how we think about it. So I do like that broad thinking, and I think employers don't want their employees to show up in pajamas, right? Isn't that the article we all read, that suddenly this generation was doing things? I don't think AU students are doing that. I don't think that's happening, but I do think just thinking through the skills that we would like students to take away from AU and what those are is really important. So we've talked about on campus, we've had conversations around the fact that it's likely the next time Carnegie puts out their rankings of universities that we will be moved into the classification of R1. That's in part because of a change in the way they're doing the system, and of course it's in part because we started many years ago in 2012 under the leadership of Neil Kerwin and Scott Bass, really placing this emphasis on being a place that does both. And that, of course, was continued in our last strategic plan. Diana's here and the work we've done around that. And so as we think about that, the challenge is then we also know we are a place of great teaching. And that is very important to us. Scholar and teacher is part of who we are and who we want to be, more importantly, and hold on to that. And so as we think about teaching and we think about how we intentionally continue great teaching at the university and make those investments, I'd be curious your thoughts on that since you've been here, and how we do that and we pay tribute and connection and continue to support what goes on in our classrooms.
Yeah, it's, again, I know something that's on a lot of people's minds because people inevitably see trade-offs, right? As you become a higher tier research university, does that mean that you somehow are lessening your focus on teaching, particularly at the undergraduate level? And this is where, talk about being able to differentiate. I don't think American University should try to be the next Harvard or the next University of Maryland or the next University of Virginia. I think we should strive to be the best version of American University that we can be. And that means that scholar-teacher model, to take it really seriously, right? Because we want students to know when they come here, both as undergraduates and as graduate students, that they are going to have close relationships with faculty members, that they will have opportunities to co-create. When you think about research, one of the things we did at JMU as we were evolving into a research university was to make sure that undergraduates had opportunities to be involved in research. I can tell you, having worked at some very large research universities, that that was an afterthought in many ways. And students would go to these large research universities as undergrads and think, oh, I'm going to be with all these world-renowned professors and I'm going to get to do all this great research. And then they'd find out that they were nowhere near those people, that they had teaching assistants, teaching their classes, that it was, graduate students, if any, that were working directly with those faculty members, and they'd be disappointed that they weren't getting what they thought they were going to be getting. Well, AU can and should be different, right? I think this is a place, because of our size, because of the fact that we're not trying to be all things to all people, that we can really focus on those areas of strength that we have and make sure that we're delivering that high quality teaching. And some of that, I think, Vicki, goes to the support that we provide to faculty, right? So, I don't know about all of you, but, I did not in graduate school have anybody teaching me how to be a good teacher. I didn't know I was going to be doing teaching, in fact, when I was in law school.
Maybe teaching you how not to teach.
Well, some of that, certainly, yes. But, when I got to JMU, I said, I've got to practice what I preach. And we kept talking about these high-impact learning practices, not just lecturing at students and having them dutifully taking notes, but having things like debate and dialogue in the classroom. And there are lots of other things, of course, like study abroad and different types of capstone projects that are high impact. And so one of the things that we did in the leadership seminar that I co-taught at JMU was we had a team debate where the students did not get to choose which side of the debate they were on. They hated this idea when they came into the classroom, right? What do you mean I have to argue on some public policy issue for a point of view I might not agree with? But of course, the whole point was to teach them certain skills, and they were doing this together. By the end of the class, they all said it was the most valuable thing that they had done. But in teaching that way, what my co-professor and I did is we brought in folks from the library who were experts and from Madison Debate to talk about how you do this, how do you research for this kind of debate and base things on facts and evidence. It was a great learning experience for me in the classroom to know that I had those professionals, and I know we have those resources here, and I hope we'll continue to foster and strengthen that, as well as the research infrastructure that I know we're working on.
See a little library group back there. Shout out to the library.
All right.
Oh, back
Thank
there
you to
too.
the
Yeah, see, good. No, and I don't know if people in the room know, but we set up a conversation for our board meetings around this. We knew the board was going to be excited about this move to R1 because it has been a long-term vision and something that started in 2012, if not a little before that, with some key hiring. But we wanted them to understand that this has to be a conversation about both. And so in our last meeting in November, we featured research investments that need to be made if we're going to be R1. And in February is committed around teaching supports and investments that need to be made for us to be R1. And I think it's a big message to our board that you're not going to get away with just one side of these investments. We're not that place. We need to do both, and how important that is. So I think that we are sending that signal for sure about how to do that and how to do it well and support people in the classroom. Another side of something that I think, as somebody, I still teach them in the classroom in the fall semester, I know that our students are a little different now in the sense that sometimes they come to us with greater needs, especially needs around wellness issues and mental health. And I think that that is something that all of us are adjusting to and trying to figure out our role in and how we can be supportive of our students, but making sure we have the resources on campus. And so I'd be interested to hear from you how you think about the university responsibility in that and the care for our students and how we can each play a role, but not putting the load on our faculty to take on that also as part of their job.
Yeah, this is certainly something that's gotten everybody's attention in higher education, right, in recent years. And it starts, I think, with the recognition that you're educating the whole person, right? And that means that we have to think about health and wellness education as well as the subject matter content of whatever we're teaching. And we just simply can't ignore it because that's, people bring their whole selves to the university and to the classroom. And I think we've all learned an awful lot about that. I can't tell you how much time I've spent in the last 12 plus years thinking about the counseling services that need to be provided and telehealth that's 24/7 because, that mental health crisis might not be between the hours of 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, right? So I'd also note here that we learned an awful lot during the pandemic about how all of this is interrelated, right? That we took for granted the idea that we could all just be together in classrooms all the time. And who knew that we would ever be in a situation like we were? And so I think it starts with that recognition that health and wellness is something we have to pay attention to. When people talk about administrative bloat in higher education, one of the biggest areas that has grown in the last decade has been in areas related to mental health, with counseling and other types of student support services. And I think that's part of the story we need to tell, because that is a reality that is here to stay. Students are looking for those services. Parents are looking for those services. One of the things that we know, for example, with disability accommodations, the demands have skyrocketed in that area. Now, some of it is a good thing. There are students that are entering higher ed that would never have been able to in the past because of the fact that we have better accommodations, that we know how to serve students who have different types of disabilities. But it comes with a cost, a very real cost that we need to be able to communicate. And this is something we spent a lot of time doing. When I was in Virginia, the presidents all got together, and I'll never forget sitting down with the governor. And when he started to hear stories about how many students had suicidal ideation, for example, in higher ed, and what kind of an issue that was, that really got his attention. So, this is something that's incredibly important. Now, having said that, Vicki, you mentioned it can't just all be on the backs of faculty members, right? Probably most of you were not trained in those areas. I know I certainly was not. And so knowing what resources are available on the campus, how to direct students in the right way. And then one other thing I would add is even as we recognize that we have got to pay attention to those needs and serve those needs as best we can, we also have to build resilience in our students. And that is something I think that is a challenge. I don't know if any of you are feeling that or noticing that with students, but there's a lot of talk about this generation coming up where the parents are perhaps partly responsible, but they were very much sheltering their students. It was everybody gets an A, everybody gets a trophy, right? And then all of a sudden you get to higher ed and gosh, maybe not everybody's getting the A. And people are failing sometimes. Things are not instantly successful. That's actually not a bad thing, but it's a safe space, if you will, in which you can fail and learn from failures. And there are ways to teach, actually, to do that. Just one example from my previous institution, we had something called the X Labs, and we have classes like that here at American, as I've learned as well, that are interdisciplinary, where students are given an unscripted problem to work on. It might come from business or industry or government, and they have mentors who come from outside the university, and these are real-world problems that people are trying to solve. So there's no answer in the back of the textbook. And the beauty of those courses is that 90% of the solutions students come up with don't work, right? So they learn, and then they get feedback. Well, here's why that wouldn't work. And that can be very frustrating at first for students, but then they build that resilience, and they realize, you learn from mistakes. You learn from trying things that don't always work. And I think that's a really important set of skills that we need to focus on and help our students with. But would love to hear your thoughts.
And I think we see a lot of that in our core and how we thought about as inquiry and how people think about complex problems, right? I mean, there's a whole issue of that. And the way you say it, and I hadn't thought about it this way, but our students are showing up here to maybe fail for the first time in their life, and how scary that is for them. And I remember I failed much earlier in life, but how that would be to come to a place where you're moving out, you're on your own, you're in a classroom, you feel the stakes are higher, but for the first time, maybe you're actually hearing that's not the answer, which is a fine thing to hear, is a good thing to hear, but how that really is a difference than maybe we've seen in past generations, and how we help them with that and deal with that, I think is important. But I agree with you, and we have great folks on work who work on these issues in student affairs, and of course our ASAC group is really doing important work on accommodations, but being mindful of faculty and how we support them when all of this is coming at you and you're feeling it. It's intense, and how we can be mindful.
And one thing we should mention along those lines, Vicki, that we know is an epidemic, and it turns out not just in American society, but actually across the world, is loneliness, which, it seems so odd, right, at a time when people are more, quote unquote, connected than ever. I mean, I've got a daughter who grew up as a digital native, right, who, is involved in every form of social media, and we get all these texts all the time, from her. And yet we know, and there's a lot of data that shows this, that a lot of students are coming in and they actually don't have meaningful social relationships or friends that they can fall back on if they're struggling with something. They don't know where to turn. And building that sense of community, if there's one thing that I really wish for American University, is that we can really work together on that people can look each other in the eye, that they can put down their phones, and I'm guilty of it just like everybody else. I mean, we're all addicted to these things in our pockets, right? But the importance of building real relationships with one another, which is done inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom in so many ways, that is a tremendous service that we can do for and with our students if we can really think about relationship building and what that looks like, including with people that might not be just like you. But I think that's one of the most critical skills that students need to learn, and that we know our society and world need.
I think we've both commented, I know you commented one day in a meeting about the fact that you can walk across campus and students just will not look up. I mean, it's kind of like, whoa, 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 you got to swerve around them because they're not looking where they're going, but that they're looking down at their phones, and how we start to break some of that. And I promise you, the way not to do it is to say hello, because I've tried that, and that does not get a good look. Just so you know, that's not it.
I still do that, Vicki. What's the right answer?
I don't know the right answer, but that one did not get great looks. But, I'm going to take an aside here and say, because I want folks in this room to know this, this has been a kind of extra stressful week in your household because John's daughter lives out in Studio City, and we've been talking a lot and connecting with alums, and I want everybody in the room to know that our student affairs group is working very hard to identify our students who are affected by what's going on in LA right now, both our incoming new students and our current students, so that we can be of support to them. We're reaching out to our alumni there. We had 2 trips planned out there next week, actually, on some business, and we're not going to go get in the way out there. We're going to hold off on those and not be part of that. But I do want you guys to know that work is being done right now to reach out. And I know some of you probably have family and friends affected by these things, so I just want to give a moment for that. But I do know in your household, many of those texts this weekend have been about making sure Eleanor is safe and in someplace safe. So,
but Vicki, that's a great. How many of you have family, friends, in Los Angeles? Probably most people in this room, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a moment, if you haven't done so already, just to reach out and say to somebody, "Are you okay? What's going on?" It is really frightening what's going on out there, as I'm sure you all know. But it's an example of where we can, take this opportunity to connect with someone maybe you haven't connected with for a while. I was on a text chain with a bunch of friends that I hadn't spoken with in years, but one of them lives in Altadena, in one of the neighborhoods that completely burned down. And I think it meant at least something to this friend that all these people were reaching out to him from across the country saying, we're thinking about you, we're here for you. But that's a great example of a moment where we can, use this opportunity to reconnect.
I have a friend who's right on the line in Santa Monica of evacuate, not evacuate. And every day I'm like, can you please just leave right now? Can you go? And he's like, we're not in the evacuation zone. And it scares me because so many people are getting caught in those moments where everybody's trying to move. And so, yeah, I think that's great advice. I'm skipping ahead a little bit because I want to get to the question that I think is important about moving forward as a university. We know we're facing significant challenges, and I'm not going to say you do, but I know some days I feel overwhelmed, and I'm sure you probably do too, by the things that are going on, external and internal to higher ed. But what inspires you, and what do you think about how we're going to face challenges, what we can look to as a university for inspiration and kind of solidarity as we go forward?
Well, that's a good, and how many of you feel overwhelmed at times in your work? Okay, so we're not alone, Vicki. That's good. I think, again, recognizing that we are all human, and there are those days, and I can tell you this past week I have felt a little bit that way as a parent, as well as a president of university, feeling like, look, I can't help my daughter. We were supposed to leave early tomorrow morning to be out there, and now, of course, we're not going to be there. There are lots of big issues, as you all know, that we're facing at American University, and there are moments when it can all feel very overwhelming. But I think one thing that really helps is, first of all, to, again, look around this room for starters. Think about the brain power that we have at this university, and what an incredible privilege and opportunity it is to get to work with so many brilliant people who bring different strengths and perspectives to the table, right? There are a lot of problems that we can solve together if we work together. And it also goes, by the way, when you think about the future of higher ed and the future of American University in particular, I think about inter and transdisciplinary work to look at these grand challenges of the 21st century that don't just fit into one disciplinary bucket. Well, we're trying to do that on the academic side, and we're going to have to do that on the university side as well. We're going to have to try some new things, and not everything is going to be successful. But I'm a big believer in pilot projects to try some different approaches. Just because we haven't done it before doesn't mean that we can't try it now. The other thing I would say that is really important and that's inspiring is to just spend time around the students. You all have, of course, great opportunities to do that all the time. But I think for those of us in administration as well, it's really, really important because it's a reminder how much, first of all, they look up to all of you and how much they feel that it is a great privilege for them to be at a place like American University, and that they are learning every day from all of us, not just by what's going on in the classroom, but they also watch how we interact with each other. And so our role modeling is important. But the students really can be a tremendous source of inspiration. And that's what one of the reasons that I taught even when I was at JMU. And I hope someday to get back in the classroom. If anybody wants to invite me to guest teach on occasion, I'm happy to do that. But it's a reminder of why we're here, right? And yes, we have big challenges in American higher education. We have big challenges in our society. But we also are in such a great position to make a difference in the world. And when you spend time around the students, they will give you that energy, that sense of excitement.
I completely agree. I mean, they're the why, right? I think about all of us in this room can have times where we're frustrated with things that are going on, but somehow just any time with them and you start to understand, and so many of them bring such hope. Not all of them, right? Some of them are pretty cranky already about I tried to explain our students to John as angsty, I think was the word I used. In our first conversation, I'm like, they're a little angsty, but that's why we love them and that's why we have them here. But they do find ways to be really hopeful, and they definitely inspire me and think about how to get forward, move forward and to get things done, and why it's so important even to never give up on it, never walk away from the great challenges we have. The last question I had was what keeps you up at night? Maybe I asked that selfishly because I don't sleep all that well, as many people know, but I'm going to spin it because I know you're much more positive than that question sounds. So what does help you feel better about like the months ahead or the time ahead? What kind of lets you rest a little bit at night?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you put that spin on it, Vicki, because we all know that we have challenges, whether it's budget or enrollment, right, or political pressures. Anybody worried about that sort of thing, right? So there's a lot that keeps us up at night. My wife will tell you I do not sleep well at night either. If someone knows the trick to just turn your brain off when you go to sleep, please let me know. But
medication.
I'll give it a try. But actually, sitting at the table earlier, Ann actually made a comment that really resonated with me, where she talked about the fact that we've seen some of these challenges before, and there are different cycles of different types of challenges, and that's where it's helpful to have a sort of longer term perspective. And I like to tell students I've earned all this gray hair by being in higher ed for as long as I have. That you do start to see that yes, we have significant challenges, but we've endured these before. Whether it's political challenges, whether it's financial challenges, whether it's enrollment challenges, higher ed has seen all of these things. Now, they may be, different in kind right now, but there are toolkits that are out there and lessons to be learned from some of those past experiences. So something that I have tried to do is to, read about some of those past experiences, read books about leaders who have faced similar challenges and how did they get through those things. I'll never forget a conversation I heard right after I got here. It was the Golden Eagles, the folks that have been out for 50 years. And I heard a student say to one of the Golden Eagles something about how this was, the worst time ever in American history and all this. And the Golden, and they were talking about politics specifically, and then these Golden Eagles proceeded to talk about, well, we lived through the 1960s. A year like 1968 wasn't necessarily a great year with the assassinations and civil rights riots and a few other things, but it was interesting to hear that conversation. The student was like, oh gosh, I'd never thought about that people actually lived through that. So I think this is where we can be helpful to our students as well. You're right, angsty is a good word, and it probably describes our faculty and staff in many respects too. But
I'm okay with that description.
Yeah,
Angsty.
but it's also our responsibility, right, to try to lift one another up, and all of us have opportunities to do that. That's why we did that week of kindness very deliberately. That may have seemed, like a hokey sort of thing to do. And look, I was willing to try, anything because I felt like building community was important. But I heard from so many people, it kind of gave them an excuse to do something they really wanted to do, right? Just to reach out to people where they might not otherwise have done so, and just made their day with some small gesture or some larger gesture of kindness. And I think if we could really try to incorporate that mindset, that would create the kind of community that will help.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let that be kind of the final word on this. I think it's a good one. I want to thank you for your time and for sitting down and having this conversation. I think everybody in this room got to learn more about you and about your vision and your experiences. I know I learned some things. But again, I want to throw the gratitude back to the folks in the room and for the fact that I know some of you may have syllabi that you're putting finishing touches on and things you're thinking about. I know ICE is in the weather, forecast, but you're here today because you care about our students and you're committed to a vision Ann had for us to really be a place that puts teaching first. So I thank you for that. I look forward to the semester ahead. Hope to be in fellowship with all of you coming up in the weeks ahead. So thank you again for being here, and thanks for the organizers. I don't know where Anna is, but thank you, and thank you to CTRL and the entire team, AV, everyone, for being here and supporting this. Thanks.
And thank you to Vicki.
Thank you both so much. So we have some extra time. There's cookies in the back if you would like to. Just a quick reminder that everything is compostable. The plates, the cups, the utensils. and that we have a dessert reception in this room at 4:30.